I stepped off the plane at London Heathrow after a 10-hour flight from LAX, feeling exactly how you expect someone to feel after sleeping only 3 to 4 hours. Groggy, a little delirious, and somehow still buzzing. The second my feet hit European ground, I was hit with this wave of excitement and fulfillment. I was finally back on the continent that, at least in my mind, had basically started the scientific and industrial revolutions. Yeah, I know it's a bit of a dramatic oversimplification, because every continent has its own deep history, but come on. I was standing in the place that had shaped so much of the modern world, and after 8 years of waiting, it felt huge. The last time I'd been here, I was in 4th grade. Back then I didn't really appreciate the history or the culture as much. I was just a kid on a family trip that also hit Paris. This time, it was different. I had a firm grasp of the significance of their culture, British cuisine included, and was ready to experience a foreign country that wasn't Canada. Little did I know how interconnected the world actually is. The whole trip had been 4 or 5 years in the making. It was supposed to be my high school graduation capstone. International travel with a massive time zone jump isn't something you do every weekend, so we planned it carefully, and London was the obvious first stop. You can argue it's one of the capitals of the world, and I wanted to revisit it with older eyes. Leeds came next because I didn't want the classic only see one of the biggest cities in a country in England, and you can't claim you've seen America if you've only been to New York. You have to also hit Texas or LA or somewhere that feels different. Leeds was going to be the hardier, more industrial British town. Amsterdam made the list partly because of the animated show Ongezillig. I swear I'm not making that up, and because, it's Amsterdam. Frankfurt, that one was a bit personal. It's the biggest German metropolitan area near the village where my last name originally came from. Technically, the German part of my DNA is only about 1%, but the idea of standing somewhere my far-away ancestors once lived felt pretty cool. The first real culture shock hit before I even left the airport. I ordered a bacon roll on the plane because it sounded properly British, and turns out their bacon is basically Canadian bacon. I prefer the American kind personally, but in that moment, I enjoyed it anyways. Looking out the window later, I was surprised by the farmland. The fields weren't laid out in the neat Thomas Jefferson squares I was used to. They followed metes and bounds using geography and local landmarks to mark who owned what, invoking instant flashbacks to AP Human Geography. Thank you, Jefferson, for the grid system that makes America farmland look so orderly by comparison. Other than that, I was mostly just jet-lagged and running on pure excitement, so my memory on those first hours were a little hazy. The Fanta being a different color was mildly interesting. By the end of the 13 days, I did change, just not in the dramatic way some of the travel stories claim. The biggest shift was realizing how connected everything already is. The foreign countries didn't feel as foreign as I expected, and even while walking through these legendary European cities, I kept thinking about the ones back at home, DC, Chicago, Vegas. We have world-class places in America too. I know, what a shocking idea. After being away, I felt like I had a real longing to return to my own country. I'm sure that's common, but it still surprised me how quickly it showed up. So, if you're listening to this, I'm an American through and through, fully aware of the stereotypes that come with that title. At the same time, I'm an open-eyed one who can appreciate other cultures without needing to tear down my own. The tone of this whole story is going to stay a little bit humorous, self-aware, because, that's how my trip actually felt. There's where mild culture shocks, awe, and the quiet realization that home was waiting on the other side. 13 days, 4 cities, one very jet-lagged American who had waited 8 years to come back. Let's start my journey talking about London. Yeah, after clearing Heathrow, which honestly felt a lot like a mega complex version of New York Airport, I had to take the subway, or as they call it, the tube, into the actual city to drop off my bags. That was my first real experience of London's outside the airport. The hotel was in Regent's Park, a nice neighborhood on the outskirts of downtown's core, and I was super glad of that choice. When I walked out of the crowded train station, the first thing that hit me, coming back to me now, was the accent. From my American point of view, that sounded funny, almost like I'd stepped into a medieval fairy tale or Harry Potter. Yes, I know that sounds childish, but it is childish. But that was genuinely one of the first things my brain locked onto. The other thing was just how crowded the public transit was. I come from a car-centric Southern Californian town. I'm not used to effective public transit, okay? Let alone packed public transit. Having to look left instead of right when crossing the street was another quick adjustment, but what I really loved was how walkable everything felt. And how late the sun stayed up. Still light at 9 p.m., not fully dark until around 10, the tiny houses, the residential streets around Regent's Park. I kept thinking about the British game We Happy Few, even though it was actually made by Canadians. The game somehow captured the exact feeling of those English residential neighborhoods perfectly. Even the signs looked more British to me. Maybe more matte colors, or maybe it was just my American bias. I still don't know. The first day was mostly spent walking around, realizing that I was in a foreign city. I did get cussed out by a driver at one point, but I didn't really care. I'm not the one who has to drive on the left side of the road in London, so take that. Yeah, you can definitely tell like I'm from America. Anyways, everyone seemed to be in a rush in the metropolis, which, I mean, I can't blame them if they live in a place this busy. I stayed to the right of the escalator so people could pass like a decent human Londoner. I went to bed exhausted and somehow woke up 4 hours later. I turned on the TV and I don't know how, but ended up watching a Korean English talk radio show. No idea why the hotel had that channel on. Eventually I gave up on sleep and went out on a peaceful walk in Regent's Park around 5 a.m. Grabbed a coffee, took an Uber back, and finally got to try the legendary full English breakfast. Hash browns, baked beans, British bacon, button mushrooms, grilled tomato. I was extremely disappointed though because it wasn't proper. There was no black pudding. That's one of my favorite British foods, and they left it out in Great Britain. Not good. I hit both the big tourist sites and the smaller ones. The Tower of London was one of the places that I was most looking forward to. I wanted to learn more about Cromwell, or how the tower had been the historical scorn of the city, but the attraction itself wasn't really that great at informing you. I mean, the Wikipedia page was honestly more useful. Riding the tube, though, felt like being a temporary London localer. Safe, efficient, kinda fun. The tube was interesting. I like it more than the ones we have in the States. The parks were relaxing and actually clean, which made me glare in the direction of the Boston Commons back home, because, you know, the Boston Commons are very dirty. So thank you, Europe. The British Museum, for all the world-renowned reputation, wasn't that cool to me. It tried to be too expansive. The Met in New York, and another museum I'll talk about in Amsterdam, was way more entertaining. Big Ben, on the other hand, felt super Londony and English, and I actually thought about the visual novel character from The Non-Existence of You and Me named Lilith, because there's a fan-made scene of her standing next to the Big Ben while she travels the world, which I watched right after getting one of the endings, and that's a separate video. And basically, this animation was made by AI. At least that's what the comments say, and it felt pretty ironic standing at the very same site in that animation. Funny how that game has altered my lens even on vacation. One of the funniest moments, though, was going to the pub Karl Marx used to sit at in the Museum Tavern. I think it was called the Museum Tavern after the British Museum, but it wasn't always called that. It was just a historic place. Walking around Westminster Abbey was great, and eating what turned out to be the best fish and chips the entire trip at the Red Lion pub in Westminster. That plate was excellent. Something I didn't like, though, was having to pay to use the restroom. Most of them are underground, which I assume has something to do with being an older sewage system in Europe. I don't really know for certain, though. And a lot of their stores don't have as many restrooms as we have in the States. At least it wasn't as bad as Germany later on, but still, paying for the restroom? What's next? 1984 Brave New World? Yeah, I know where the authors got their inspiration from. What I didn't expect was how prevalent American culture still was. American fast food chains were everywhere and always busy. Even some of the groceries surprised me. Avocados were cheaper in England than they are in California, where, they're actually grown. That's a bit crazy. Gavin Newsom? Oh, we need to look into that. Like, with older eyes, London still felt like a wonderland in some ways, but not in the same magical, unique place it had been in 4th grade. Maybe because the earlier trip was in winter and this summer version felt different. It felt like a foreign country still, but not too foreign. Less foreign than Quebec City had felt. At the same time, it reminded me of a mix between New York and the size of Washington, D.C. and monuments and walkability. I know some Europeans would probably complain that DC is only walkable because it was modeled after European cities, and to that I say, yes! Good on you, Europe. The people were really friendly overall. The one driver who cussed at me was the exception, but why would I care? I was in a cathedral in Westminster Abbey, and the British guy monitoring one of the towers recognized my accent and started asking where I was from. As a Californian, of course I say California. I don't say the United States, because the whole world knows California. He started talking about the Wild West and how it was actually not that wild and just a Hollywood dramatization. Then he mentioned how bears in California and America are pretty scary, and how the California flag has a bear on it. Pretty knowledgeable. I was impressed, but being the nerd I am, I had to inform him that California's grizzly species is actually extinct. He just said, oh. And then the line started forming behind me, so he basically told me to forget he said anything and sent me on my way. Not in a mean way, more like just, I've caused a small ruckus. It was still a fun conversation to have. Because the world is so connected now, the differences, the different accents, different food, different architecture, driving on the left, they were real, but they didn't make the place feel completely alien. There was so much American pop culture floating around that the gap felt smaller than I expected. One of the cooler little moments was when I was hunting for a restroom, couldn't find a free one, because of course I can't. I just walked into the House of Lords and used theirs instead of paying 10 pence or a pound. In some park, I used a free government bathroom. That's a win. Overall, London is a big, sprawling, multicultural city that you should visit at least once. My recommendation is if you want to actually experience the culture, you should stay a bit outside the city center. Force yourself to use the tube and spend real time walking around Westminster. That was definitely the nicest part of the city for me. 13 days, 4 cities, and London was the opening chapter. Jet lagged. Not as magical, a little disappointing in places, yet somehow still familiar and exhilarating. Next stop was Leeds. From London, I took the train to Leeds and honestly fell in love with train travel. It's just so convenient. The views weren't as scenic as I'd pictured, but they still beat staring at clouds from an airplane. Tickets are cheap compared to flying, the trains are fast, and the whole experience is relaxing. Europe's rail system really impressed me. Like, a lot. Especially coming from a country where real public transit barely exists outside a handful of cities, and even then, it's honestly not that good. When I arrived in Leeds, the first thing that hit me after the industrial English architecture, which has its own solid aesthetic, was the sheer number of American chains. Chick-fil-A, Popeyes, McDonald's, Burger King. I even think I spotted a Dunkin' there. I thought London was Americanized. Leeds had basically the same density of American fast food spots as my hometown. That was shocking. The city itself isn't as massive as London, but it's clearly grown into a diverse university town with a lot of different foods and cultures mixed in. Speaking of food, one of the early nights, I decided I had to try British Chinese. You know how in America, we have orange chicken and Panda Express, and every Asian American is quick to tell you it's not real Chinese food? Britain took that concept and just ran with it to the extreme, adding french fries and curry sauce to the mix. The dish is called salt and pepper. I ordered fried chicken with chips and curry sauce. Then I tried talking to a woman running the stand in Chinese, because I got a 3 on the AP Chinese test, so I should be able to speak Chinese, but my pronunciation is pure Da Meiguo Koyin, Yixiang John Cena, so I had to repeat myself a few times. The chicken and curry sauce was actually pretty decent. The fries weren't, but, you know, that's kind of the point. Order them, take the photo, laugh about British Chinese food including French fries, and then talk about it later on this visual podcast. I was staying right in the middle of downtown, which had way more party energy than the residents of Regent's Park area in London. The hotel still didn't have black pudding, despite being in the north with their full English, so this was starting to feel a bit personal, I admit. I'd been told over and over to go to this historic pub in Leeds, so I ordered the black pudding scotch egg there and fish and chips, and it was the most disappointing meal of the entire trip. I would have been better off fasting. I've had better fish and chips in America, and American fish and chips are already not that great, friend. Over-battered, not really that much fish. That's what I call Americanized fish and chips. Turns out, even England has them. At a historic pub in an industrial blue-collar English university town. One of my favorite moments was actually grabbing a bacon bap from this marketplace square where there was also black pudding, and I got it from this like real Englishman who you could tell liked what he did. He threw some HP sauce and it tasted great. But the real highlight of Leeds, and maybe the whole country, if you're British, agree or disagree with me. I actually got this recommendation from some guy on Discord with a Lilith profile picture, because he insisted I go here. I went to a Wetherspoons, and I ordered a decent plate of fish and chips, and sitting there, I read the local Wetherspoons magazine, just like, you know, a common Wetherspoons goer. And for those Americans who don't know, Wetherspoons is basically just a British pub version of Denny's or IHOP, and it's weirdly perfect. I really liked it. And they have hotels too, that's pretty cool. I mean, there wasn't a huge must-do attractions in Leeds, beyond some museums and libraries, so I took a day trip to York. Ate Yorkshire pudding, of course. Walked the historic Roman walls and felt properly English. Even if it was a bit touristy, Leeds itself felt more English than London simply because it's smaller. But it felt more Americanized at the same time. My original expectation didn't land. York got closer to what I was looking for to, even though it was pretty touristy. And how could I talk about England and food without mentioning Greggs? I ate at Greggs every single day. The English version of Dunkin'. And I'm a big Dunkin' fan, but Greggs is excellent. Sausage rolls, all the bakes they have, the corned bake, chicken bake, coffee, even the matcha. I like their matcha. Some British guy questioned me when I said I come to England for the food. He said wherever he goes, he doesn't really go for the food. When he goes to America, he never thinks about the food. Of course you don't. You already have all the fast food chains over in England. Meanwhile, if I sit in my town in California, I can't get a Greggs, a Wetherspoons, or a proper chippy back home. Right across from my hotel in Leeds, I had some of America's biggest hitters staring right back at me in the face. Here, you talk about fish and chips? They don't even know what proper fish and chips, mushy peas, or beans on toast are, so there's a difference in influence, as you can see. But what Leeds actually taught me is that the stuff that sticks from a trip, it isn't your fancy hotels, it's not the big tourist attractions or the expensive souvenirs you accrue, it's the small things that make you feel a little bit more local. Even if that version of local is Chinese takeout with chips and curry sauce, a Wetherspoons fish and chips with a Wetherspoons magazine, a bacon bap from a real English guy, or a Greggs sausage roll every morning that you walk the sidewalks. Leeds was shorter, stranger, and more Americanized than I expected, but those ordinary moments ended up being some of the best. The next stop was Amsterdam. Amsterdam. Amsterdam was a bit different from the start. I actually flew into the English airport in Leeds first. I drove there, and I flew out of the English airport from Leeds. And despite what I heard about this casually explained video about European airports, having half the security checks, that wasn't my experience. It felt pretty much like an American airport, except back home the lines move faster, and TSA has that face scan system, which is really convenient. After landing, I had to take the bus into the city, and I remember wondering if I'd finally feel like I was in a truly foreign country, because I was finally leaving an English-speaking country. I mean, I was leaving England, okay? England, they speak English. America, we speak English. I can see why we would have a lot of cross-cultural connection, even if it mostly goes one way. The city itself in Amsterdam was impressive. Amsterdam prospered during the Dutch Renaissance and clearly invested heavily in that iconic architecture and aesthetic. The canals, the narrow, crooked houses, the whole look. I was excited to be in the place that spoke a different language and used to be the headquarters of the Dutch East Indies Company. I've learned so much about them in AP World that I'm pretty sure talking about the Dutch East Indies Company, the VOC, helped me get a 5 on the exam for one of the essay questions. But more than any of that, I was just proud to be standing in the country where ongezellig was made. If that's not something to be proud of, I don't know what would be. I stayed in one of the more touristy parts of town. Like, you always have to keep your head on a swivel in any big city. England felt pretty safe. American cities are American cities. But Amsterdam actually felt the safest of all the places I visited. There's this perception that American cities are dirty, and I'm not gonna lie, that's true, but aside from the parks, Amsterdam was pretty dirty too. But it was also really fun. The walkability is something I still miss, and I could literally walk from the train station through downtown to my hotel. It is just unfathomable to the American mind. Food-wise, the French fries were by far the best thing the Netherlands had to offer. I hit up Fibo, the chain with all that deep fried snack behind those little cute windows, a couple of times, but it got old. It was just American food. I mean, it wasn't American food, but it felt like American food because it was all deep fried, only with European portions. Their fried chicken was some of the best I ever had, though. And after 2 to 3 visits, I ain't gonna lie, it didn't matter whether it was the sausage croquette or the Indonesian deep fried whatever. The food started tasting the same. Prices were reasonable in the Netherlands, unless it's housing, and the supermarkets were noticeably cheaper than California. Hotel breakfast wasn't great. I had to make myself some hagelslag, or as the Dutch say. That was terrible pronunciation, but do you know the Dutch cheese sound? Like, I can't repeat it. I'm just not goated like that, but that's what I had, so it was authentic. And the Rijksmuseum was exactly what I wanted the British Museum to be. Focused, expansive art, artifacts about the country itself. This is going to make a lot of English people mad, but the Rijksmuseum was way better than the British Museum in my opinion. Not quite Louvre or Met level, but the best museum I visited the whole trip. One small moment, though, that stuck me was just sitting on a bench with coffee on a regular Dutch street, looking at the houses, admiring the imperfections, while 2 local women sat next to me and were talking. I obviously didn't understand the Dutch, but every so often they drop a clear English curse word right in the middle of the sentence before switching back. I still don't know if the Dutch curse words are the same as English, or if they just actively prefer the English versions, but it was very entertaining. Well, like, you would hear them say something in Dutch like, Ich bin varje mit ongezellig. Curse word. Hallo. Oh, nee. I mean, it was really funny. I liked it. I also visited the former headquarters of the Dutch East Indies Company. There's a university there now. Apparently they used to have a museum exhibit about the VOC, but it got removed. Knowing what I know from AP World, the cultivation system and the fact that it was probably, one of the most valuable corporations that ever existed during the 1600s. Remember 1600 moral standards? I can see why they would probably remove the exhibit, even though I don't know the exact details. Still, it would have been cool to see, like, one of the flags or something, but I'm sure the Netherlands has their reasons. I'll defend English food all day. It's my favorite cuisine, but Dutch food? If you want to make fun of the country for food, go after the Netherlands, okay? It's basically a food desert, and there's pickled eel, which is actually pretty good, even though it doesn't help with your breath. Stroopwafels, which are good until you have like 2 or 3, then it gets boring. And just many deep-fried finger foods. Bitterballen, or basically just deep-fried gravy balls, are one of the most popular, must-try Dutch foods in Amsterdam, but they're just not that good, okay? Stick to the eel if you're feeling adventurous, or just get French fries with truffle mayonnaise, because that was by far the best food ever, which I ate multiple times a day. Most of the restaurants are in touristy areas where British, American, or Italian, literally because the Netherlands is not known for their food. Which, I mean, it's good for your lifestyle, but when you vacation there, it's a bit interesting. Because I specifically wanted Dutch food. Even the McDonald's had, like, a croquette burger that wasn't really that impressive. I'll say it once, I'll say it again. This is probably my 3rd time saying it, though. The fries with truffle mayo. Excellent. Perfect. We don't have that in America. You guys do French fries better than us, and we're supposed to be the kings of fast food. Amsterdam was extremely touristy, so English was everywhere. Sometimes there were more English words than Dutch ones. No. Most of the time there were more English words than Dutch ones. The architecture was different, and the culture felt a bit different from England. People came to be maybe a little bit more rude on average, though that's a broad generalization, and there were plenty of polite, pleasant Dutch people too. Still, the whole place felt super Americanized. One of the main lessons of this whole trip is just a lot of Western Europe might as well be little America. I felt like I was in a more foreign country when I visited Fredericksburg, Texas. They also don't fly national flags nearly as much as we do. Or as the Canadians do, before you say it's an American thing. So, that was a noticeable difference. The ongezellig part was fun, and I actually got to ask an actual Dutch woman what the word ongezellig meant. She didn't know the show, so she spent a solid 5 minutes explaining that there's no clean translation for the word, but eventually just said it translates to cozy, so ongezellig is basically not cozy. All you ongezellig my Coco fans like calling the show's translation asocial, that's a falsified translation. You're wrong. I mean, that's part of ongezellig, that's part of the reason why I named this channel Studio Netherlands, because it comes from, Studio Massa, and the Netherlands comes from the Netherlands. Thank you, the Netherlands. Thank you, Amsterdam. I took a day trip to Haarlem, not the New York one, of course. It felt like a quieter, less touristy version of Amsterdam, with the same good fries and fewer canals. Amsterdam itself is basically the Las Vegas of Europe. Very accurately so. Their flag has 3 X's, okay? And despite the foreign language and different architecture, I still felt like I was visiting a slightly different version of America because of all the English words and Americanized chains, which were always crowded. I don't distinctly remember restroom payment battles this time, but with Amsterdam done, it was time to head to Frankfurt, Germany, and boy, that was an interesting experience. I took the train from Amsterdam to Frankfurt, and once again, the convenience shocked my American brain. Even though the ride was 4 hours long, it still felt easier than a 2 or 3 hour flight. That feeling of easy European train travel wouldn't last the whole day, or the trip, but at the start, it was still impressive. First impression of Frankfurt. It looked like a mid-sized American city, not New York big, more like Atlanta or even LA in terms of skyline and downtown size. The train station itself was the coldest and most detached of any I've been through on my trip. Not exactly hostile. Well, areas, but most of the areas aren't hostile, just impersonal. It was summer, 95 degrees, and there was no air conditioning anywhere. That became a recurring theme in this chapter, by the way, so I hope you like hearing me rant about AC if you've stayed this long. Once I left the station, the streets were wider, cars were more present, and the sidewalks felt less leisurely than the other big 3 cities. It involved that more American-style city energy, and it was about as dirty as a typical American downtown. Not quite as dirty as Amsterdam, mind you, but still pretty dirty. Even a car-centric European city, though, and this is the difference, is still more walkable than most American ones. But when it's 95 degrees outside and you begin to start questioning how much you actually like the walkability culture. Still, I was happy to finally be somewhere that didn't feel quite as Americanized as the other 3 cities, even though there were still a lot of American chains. But there were also a bit more local German ones, and English was noticeably less present. Frankfurt had its own culture, even if America culture still felt omnipotent throughout every city I've been to. I've stayed at the Marriott just outside the old city. The old city looks very German in aesthetic, even if a lot of it was rebuilt to be some sort of like fake historical area, the same way a lot of buildings in Boston look, but aren't. Only at least Frankfurt, Germany has a valid excuse for why they had to rebuild their historic areas, unlike Boston, which, just bees Boston. You can probably tell my opinion on Boston. Dunkin' Donuts is what they have, and yeah, that's Dunkin' Donuts. Dunkin' Donuts is what Boston has. Anyways, I don't really mind the fake aesthetic, though. I'd rather have a rebuilt historic looking downtown, or old city, that still carries cultural atmosphere rather than, plain contemporary architecture. And that applies to you too, Boston, even though I don't like a lot about you. Because the problem with contemporary architecture is just it feels disconnected from any place or history or culture. The regular downtown, it felt exactly interchangeable with any other big city downtown from London, New York, LA, Montreal. Globalization has made a lot of these centers feel sadly similar, which is not the feeling I want while on vacation. I didn't walk around Frankfurt as much as the other cities. I mean, the Marriott was by far the best value hotel of the trip. Sauna, steam room, a cold water hose. They actually served solid German food every night. People in the city seemed more impatient overall in Frankfurt, which was a direct contrast to my hotel, which was amazing and provided magazines. And I'm aware that that's a bit of a generalization. And looking back, it's probably more of a Frankfurt thing rather than German thing, because, Frankfurt is the financial capital of the EU. You wouldn't go to Boston and decide all of America is rude just because a few New Englanders can be so blunt or a lack of a smile on their face. Same logic applies here. Of the attractions, the Goethe Museum was interesting. I wish I'd known more about him going in. What wasn't interesting was the complete lack of air conditioning and the open windows letting in 90-degree heat pour straight into the building. Restroom culture was very rough though. Train station bathrooms require payment. It's nearly impossible to find one inside a supermarket, whether that be Lidl or D&M, and the ones you pay for aren't even clean. I've been to Taco Bell restrooms. Better. In Amsterdam, I never really had to worry about this. In Frankfurt, you do, and all the restrooms are underground just like in England, only you have to pay for it and they don't offer that many. None of the restaurants here had air conditioning, by the way, which is brutal when it's 95 degrees. I once had this German friend from the Ruhr Valley who talked about consistent 100-degree weather. I thought he was messing up the calculation from Celsius to Fahrenheit, but he was not. By far the best part of Frankfurt was taking the S-Bahn out to the small village that my last name comes from. Being able to talk to the locals in my broken, grammatically incorrect German was genuinely fun. They could still understand me, and more importantly, I could understand them, since their English was even worse than my German. Just wandering around local supermarkets and buying a newspaper felt special. The village itself had much more authentically German aesthetic than the steel skylines of Frankfurt. I also made it to the cathedral and spire, but the heat was just so unbearable the whole time. The experience was interesting, but just your energy depletes so much. On the way back from Speyer, I went to Mannheim, and the train stopped for a full hour. It was crowded, air conditioning was only moderate, and the whole thing was just miserable. I wanted to check out the anime convention in Mannheim, but the heat took all the energy out of me, so no German anime convention for me. Food-wise, I tried Wiener Schnitzel. Ironic since it's Austrian, yet constantly treated as German. Like some other things. The breading was better than what you usually did in America, but the overall quality was pretty similar to what I had in Fredericksburg, Texas. I'll admit it, in my heart, I like Texas's version more. Okay? Maybe I'm just an uncultured American, but the Texas version, it was bigger, more crispy, and had better sauce. In Fredericksburg. Sorry, that's the truth. The Döner, on the other hand, was sehr lecker. The Döner was clearly better in Germany than it was back home. Better price, atmosphere, taste. I also noticed there was a bit more human body odor in Germany, but that could have been due to the heat. But I mean, I have heard like in France, there's a culture of not really like wearing deodorant to be more natural, which was a culture shock, but it's just a different preference. I'm not saying it was like bad or anything, but what I will say is the airport, yeah, you want to talk about bad? That was bad. As I prepared to leave Germany, I have to go on a tangent with this, okay? Because this was even worse than the lack of air conditioning or the paid-for restrooms, and that's saying something. It was worse than that 1-hour train delay. Frankfurt Airport was the most miserable airport experience I've ever had, and I've been to the airport in Oakland, California, and LAX. It takes double or triple the time to drop your bags off and get through security compared to TSA in the United States. During the government shutdown, I've seen workers part of the TSA and Homeland Security work at a more fast, enthusiastic, and deliberate pace. And that's not because they were happy. It was a government shutdown. They weren't even getting paid, but they were still doing their jobs really efficiently. Germany, train is shockingly easy. Getting into Germany by train was very easy. Getting out was the opposite. I arrived 2.5 hours early and still almost missed my flight to London Heathrow. The bag drop lines were long, security was slow, but the worst was the border control line just to leave. It took a full hour of pure standing and waiting, more than the length of this entire podcast. And the workers kept leaving their stations. There were 2 gates open, then there were 1. And then there were 2 again, and then there was 1. Permanently. They were closing gates midway through. So much for German efficiency. Look, as an American reflecting on this whole journey, I'm aware I have bias. I am aware a lot of what I experience is specific to that one day and not the full picture, but this is one hill I'm willing to die on. German efficiency is a myth. German product quality, like the stuff and beauty skincare at DM, is real. Efficiency? This was the least efficient thing in the world. And again, I've been to LAX. I thought I knew what inefficiency was. Despite all of that though, going to that German village was still my favorite experience of the Frankfurt stop. Overall, Frankfurt is a decent city, reminiscent of Atlanta. If I come back to Germany, I'll probably aim for a different city like Hamburg, maybe Munich. I'm a bit weary of Berlin now because I suspect it would probably feel Americanized too, as did all the cities. One thing I know for sure though is if I ever return to Germany or to Europe at all, it will be in the winter time. Looking back across those 13 days, London, Leeds, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, I kept running into the same quiet realization. The world is far more interconnected than the mythology of travel usually admits. I was moving through West Germanic countries that already share a lot of cultural DNA with the United States, so of course the streets felt strangely recognizable and the same chains kept appearing. I genuinely loved the change of scenery and the chance to step into different cultures. It just never felt as foreign as I had expected them to. By the end, I was ready to go home. I wanted restrooms that didn't require money and air conditioning that actually existed. I'm sure plenty of people who visit America eventually start missing better public transit and walkable streets the same way. The real gifts of the trip was simpler than I thought. One was the freedom to change your environment and learn leisurely, walking down a random street, sitting in a cafe, trying pickled eel, or slipping into the House of Lords just to use a free bathroom. The other was unstructured time. No responsibility, just space to let your mind wander and wander. That's actually how this podcast even got started. I realized I had a lot of half-formed thoughts that would never fit neatly into a short video, so I decided to talk about them instead. I'm aware of my biases. Southern California is pretty comfortable and a great place to return to. Still, I was glad to be back the same way most people are glad to return to their home countries after a while. When this ends, I want you to feel reflective, more than anything else. More than liking my voice or humor if you've stayed this long, which, trust me, is like a near 0% chance, but I mostly do this for myself anyways. But if you have made it this far, I want you to feel reflective. We often head abroad hoping to find better models for living. After you experience the ups and downs of those models, because no place is perfect, not even Singapore, though I've never been, you sometimes find yourself quietly missing the one you already know, the one you've called home. The roads we walk when we travel change us, both in obvious ways and in ways we only notice later. They show us that every culture has something worth learning and that we each carry something worth offering in return. That part still feels true and helpful to me. At the same time, however, it's hard to not notice how the same global pop culture keeps smoothing the edges of cities and countries, sorting us towards whatever feels more familiar and more profitable, which causes the least amount of friction. The world grows more connected, which is genuinely good, but it also risks becoming uniform at the same time. The beauty of other cultures and of your own exist in their differences, in their friction. I left Europe grateful for what I saw, grateful to come home, but at the same time, a little uneased about how easily those differences can start to fade and fleet into static.